Hi, I'm Emma. I'm doing Refutation versus AJ's proposition, which was that minimum wage is going to cause economic problems, and by this he means increasing minimum wage is going to cause economic problems. In Refutation, an increase in minimum wage would not cause the economic problems that he is going to propose, but in fact would increase money being circulated in the economy, create new jobs, and allow an inflation index to counteract economic issues. So his first point is that increasing minimum wage would raise unemployment levels. He supports this with uncited statistics, which prove his argument to be neither credible nor viable right off the bat. From his first sentence, he says his topic is California minimum wage, which is inconsistent with the statistics he chooses to use that are for the United States minimum wage, which is $7.25 since July 2015. In California, our minimum wage since January 1st of this year was $11 now. The statistics, oh my gosh, I can't say statistics. The statistic he uses says 38% of employers who currently pay minimum wage said that they would lay off some employees if the minimum wage were increased to $10.10. In rebuttal, if we're talking about the United States now, the Economic Policy Institute stated that a minimum wage increase from the current rate of $7.25 an hour to $10.10 would inject $22.1 billion into the economy and create about 85,000 new jobs over a 3-year phase-in period. His second point is that an increased minimum wage would hurt small businesses. He says that small businesses would be hurt because they would have to pay their employees more, which would come out of their pocket, and goes on to say they'd raise prices of their products to counteract this to get more profits. So if they were laying off people, or if they were having to pay their employees more but also earning more, this should be creating an equilibrium that would cancel each other out. He follows up on this introduction to inflation by using his own experience as sort of support. He says, "I noticed they changed the dollar menu to the value menu at McDonald's," which is a very narrow example and does not use fact or solid evidence, and in no provable way can the menu change be solely attributed to the minimum wage increase. The only example used to support the inflation claim, so that whole point is pretty much dismissible by the way it is presented. In reality, inflation would be accounted for by an inflation index. According to Leanna Fox, PhD senior analyst at the Economic Policy Institute, inflation indexing guarantees low-wage workers a wage that keeps pace with the rising cost of goods and services. Indexation is a technique to adjust income payments by using a price index in order to maintain the value of money belonging to the public after inflation occurs. His final point is that increased minimum wage would hurt young adults and teenagers. He says that if they can't afford to pay their workers, they'll be replaced by machines. This has no validity and does not have any background support of businesses that were suggesting this is the action they would take. It would cost a lot to develop and install advanced machinery that could do an adequate enough job to be able to replace a person, and because there have not been significant numbers of losses of jobs attributed to machinery development cited here, it is not credible or substantial enough to make his argument. So in conclusion, an increase in minimum wage would not cause the economic problems that were proposed, but in fact would increase money being circulated in the economy, create new jobs, and allow an inflation index to counteract economic issues. Wow.
Did you have an outline?
Kind of.
Kind of?
It's not stapled. And it's
That's
got
okay.
a big scratch on it, but yeah.
That's all right. Better than not having an outline.
Yeah.
All right, you did a nice job identifying the advocate's claim. You suggest a counterclaim immediately, suggesting that there will be a beneficial result. You give us a preview of what the three benefits are going to be. I don't know that those three benefits necessarily correlate to the claims that the advocate is presenting, or if they're going to be argued separately. In the body of the speech, I do think that they come up at appropriate points. You don't necessarily need a counter structure, so be careful about that. On the first point, you challenge the advocate's evidence as being uncited, that there is a conflict between whether we're dealing with California data or the total United States, and you give us a piece of factual data about the difference between the actual minimum wages. That's perfectly acceptable, although you need to explain how that undermines the advocate's argument in general. If the advocate is just talking about the increases in California, then all of your information probably needs to address those increases. But I think you are correct in pointing out that none of the evidence specifies that it's just to the California increase, and as a consequence, there might be some questions about this. The advocate does cite a statistic about the number of employers who said that they were going to decrease offerings of jobs. And you say, well, that's a U.S. sort of thing. And then you provide an economic benefit that is also a U.S. sort of thing. So if we're going to be responding to what the U.S. increase in the minimum wage might be, assuming it went up to $10.10 an hour, which is what appears to be the level of discussion that's going on here, then you've got a good argument. If we're going to stick to the California issue, this information doesn't necessarily address the California data that's going on there. So we're back to the same issue that you kind of presented as being problematic. It would be nice to maybe have some information that was particular to California also, that it was likely to produce similar kinds of benefits. I do think you need to explain a little bit how the 85,000 jobs are going to come about. I'm assuming that the argument being presented by the economists here is that if we increase the amount of money in the economy by $22 billion, that's going to generate some economic activity, and that would produce the result. But that's not very clearly explained on that point. On the small business issue, there's this discussion about equilibrium that was not very clear, and I think that it doesn't get you nearly as much as you think it's getting you. I do think that you have a reasonable press on the notion of inflation with the dollar menu versus the value menu, that in fact is hard to track to inflationary pressures, and certainly connecting the inflationary pressures to increases in the minimum wage. I don't know that the advocate did that, and that's a good press to be making at that particular point. The notion that there's going to be an index for wage increases, well, that's, I'm not sure, inherent in the increase proposed in the minimum wage. In other words, California's definitely goes up on a regular basis because they have that $15 an hour increase, and it's going up $1 each year for the next 5 or 6 years, whatever the schedule happens to be. Wage indexing is likely to produce that advantage, but I'm not sure that it's connected to the minimum wage automatically. That seems like it's a potential proposal that might address that issue, but I'm not sure that it deals with the issue that the advocate's talking about here. And then you basically press them on their argument concerning automation, and you said that they don't have any particular information. That's okay. You say it's cost prohibitive. I think that would be a place where you might want to have some information that suggests what it costs to install X kind of piece of equipment. So when people are talking about kiosk for ordering, if it's going to cost $7,200 to put in a kiosk at McDonald's, well, that would, the increase in the minimum wage, it would take 6 years to pay somebody that increased minimum wage to recover the cost that the kiosk is going to cost. Then I think your argument makes a lot of sense. But we don't have any evidence on what those costs are. I don't have any way of making a comparison. And so I think both of you are maybe a little thin in that particular argument. All right, thank you.